Destiny is a game I hold near and dear to my heart. I love basically everything about it. The guns, the environment, and most of all the story. To me, it really feels like it's a real, breathing world filled with people who are broken and built by war. People who are hurt, grieved, and rose up in the wake of pain. Things were building, and you could feel it, until we saw the true threat. The Witness. A threat so large that no matter what, it seemed as if we had absolutely zero chance to survive. This expansion was the culmination of years of Destiny storytelling, and everything was set up so perfectly throughout the previous expansions that I had complete faith that they could bring it home. And while I wished that was the case, Lightfall has been a pretty big disappointment. My name is Zoe, and in this video, I'm looking to answer the question that's burning a hole in everyone's mind. What went wrong with Lightfall? I've played through the game at least 5 times on Legendary and have done quite a bit of research, so hopefully I can bring a new perspective to the topic. Are you ready? Alright then, let's start with a character everyone wants to love but wasn't given enough time. Rohan. Probably one of the coolest characters design-wise, and another character to add to the gruff daddy with strong willpower list. But as cool as he was, he barely got any time to shine as a character. We met him in the first mission, talked to him a bit, had an amazing cutscene between him and Osiris, and then he got turned into silly putty by the MacGuffin. And while the scene itself is very well voiced, written, and built, it left me with one feeling. It had almost no meaning behind it. While gathering footage, I was playing the game with my friend, and the first thing she said after Rohan's death was,
"I don't feel anything."
And honestly, I think that encapsulates the issue with Rohan's death scene. How is someone supposed to feel? Here, we can take a look at a far better death scene in Destiny, the death of Cayde 6. The reason Cayde's death in Forsaken's campaign was so impactful was not just because it was unexpected, but because we had known Cayde since the beginning of the first Destiny, and got to know and connect with him. Cayde's final moments are heartbreaking. He pulls out his ghost only for it to be shot by the hiding Scorn, and as he cowers, broken, beaten, and bruised, he lets out one last,
How's my hair? Speechless. Typical.
Before being killed. That moment had true emotion, it had depth, and it absolutely hurt to watch. The entire Destiny community felt that death, and continued to feel it for years after, as people wished for the return of Cayde. Now, the short time with Rohan could have been interesting if we got to see him a little more and gotten some more character development. I have some ideas, actually, for what could have been different. For example, what if it tapped into perhaps his fear of a Cloud Strider's end? All Cloud Striders know that once they get their augments, they've installed a ticking clock for when their body gives out. It's a super interesting setup, accepting that responsibility is a really big one. But sadly, there's nothing explored there. He's stoic in the face of death, which is effective simply due to the struggled voice acting. But in retrospect, it really has no impact because I don't know much about him. My biggest issue with this is that it isn't one shared across every character in Destiny. I'm invested in characters like Zavala, Keitel, and Crow because of their smart development, well-placed dialogue, and actual time to explore their ideals, and whenever they're part of the story, it does work. As well as that, Rohan and Nimbus' relationship gave a feeling of it not actually being very important. Despite them telling us they're close, you don't actually see much of it, which is upsetting because there were some things that felt as if they were trying to build a bond between them. For example, multiple times during their interactions, you see the two of them fist bumping. This could be a symbol of their connection and friendship, but we only actually see it just a few times. It simply feels undercooked, like there were cut moments of them displaying their connection in a natural way. Next, let's talk about Osiris, one of the most pivotal characters in the background of Destiny 2's story leading up to Lightfall. In Lightfall, Osiris is set up as a desperate, cornered animal, once regarded as the strongest guardian ever, reduced to a lightless old man. He's scared and sad that he can't do anything, yet rushes headlong into danger as if he still had his ghost. He expresses these traits during the Spire of the Watcher dungeon, released the season right before Lightfall launched. After defeating Calus, he says that we need to follow his visions, because he needs you to carry this out so that he can once again be proven trustworthy. Moving on to the Lightfall campaign, in the mission First Contact, as you and Osiris board one of the Witness's ships, he seems unprepared, tearing through it, coming up with plans on the go, and even getting onto one of the Cabal dropships, where he is unceremoniously launched out of the ship onto the hostile, Shadow Legion-infested Neomuna. Leading up to Lightfall, I absolutely loved this angle for his character. In lore, Osiris was once described as the strongest guardian that ever lived. He would destroy everything in his path, and was known as a destroyer to all enemies of humanity. But now, after losing his light, he's desperate to not be useless in the face of the second collapse of humanity. In all the cutscenes that have him and Rohan speak, this is shown. For example, when Rohan lets Osiris out of the ball, and Osiris proposes to keep going, Rohan replies,
I understand what's at stake, Lightbearer. Far better than you. Not all of us have lives to spare.
It's a wonderful contrast between how he's acting and his actual abilities. However, this being said, plenty of people in the community found him annoying and whiny, and while I can see why, personally, I think it's an incredibly interesting way to take a Guardian, and serves a potential arc of him giving up his position as a soldier to become a mentor. Alright, it's about time we get to what most people cite as the biggest annoyance in Lightfall. Nimbus. Lord almighty, did the community explode when they were introduced. Twitter threads and YouTube videos calling them the most annoying character Destiny ever added, saying they're written worse than characters from year 1 of Destiny. And unfortunately, I have to agree with this. Now, I hold absolutely nothing against the voice actor, but wow is Nimbus annoying. Some of the lines were just the absolute worst. Me and my friends would repeat certain lines like, light bearers, from their first appearance, or,
The uglier they are, the harder they fall, right?
beginning to end, they have this same jovial tone, even after Rohan's death. Rohan was Nimbus's best friend and mentor, and they just seem to not care, aside from the few missions where they switch to being super sentimental. It takes you out of the experience completely and isn't charming in the slightest. The main issue I come across when people discuss Nimbus's place in the story is that it doesn't feel as if they're taking it seriously. At this point in the Destiny universe, things are past a point where we can have characters that are just having a good time with no hint of a care for what's going on. Throughout the whole thing, they're cracking jokes about how serious Rohan is, how ugly Calus is, Osiris being a silly, grumpy old guy, and the list goes on. Even if these lines were funny, it doesn't excuse how it makes it feel as if there aren't any actual stakes, where everything else in Lightfall should be making me feel as if stakes are at a maximum. Now, many people will point to Cade 6 and how much the community loved him despite being pretty much the same thing, but I think there's a difference. Namely on when he was in the game. Sure, there was serious stuff before Forsaken, but it wasn't actually on the level of Lightfall. Next, let's look at how Nimbus could have been handled in relation to Rohan's death. As previously mentioned, there's a feeling that they aren't really affected by Rohan getting radial masted. But what if they actually were? Hear me out on this. What if Nimbus was actually the one who got Rohan killed? What if Nimbus made a mistake, causing Rohan to sacrifice himself to save them? So instead of Rohan simply being eaten by the mast with no impact, Nimbus throws themselves at the mast, causing it to go into some implosion mode so that Rohan has a reason to go in to stop it from making things that much worse. In my opinion, this is already a much more interesting turn of events, with Nimbus remaining alive to mourn and regret their decision. I seriously wish that something like this happened, because Nimbus being annoying at first and being forced to grow up and be at the forefront of Neo Muna's defenses could be amazingly cool. Instead, we just have a death with no meaning and a character who isn't affected by it. Let's take a little step back from my disappointments and focus on some of the things I love about Lightfall. First of all, the visual storytelling is incredible. Bungie's art team consistently knocks it out of the park with everything in this game, with one of the best aspects being the scale of the world. During the first mission, as you jump from ship to ship, you look down to see the Typhon Imperator, and it makes you feel absolutely tiny in comparison to its might. Even in the vast desolation of space, it still fills up most of your view. The Typhon Imperator's interior is angular and covered in treasure, showing Calus' desire for form over function. I also want to talk about how amazing the majority of the characters are, starting with Keitel. She's been a fan favorite for a long time and thankfully made the transition into Lightfall's story maintaining her quality writing. She's always felt threatening, with a feeling of, thank God she's on our side. But that feeling is even more potent during the campaign. There are several moments where you feel empowered by her. For example, during the final stand to protect the Veil, she stands alongside you and shouts the Cabal saying,
We are
We
Cabal.
got friendlies.
We eat the mountains. We drink the seas.
or on her radio broadcasts, where she calls the Shadow Legion Cabal cowards for standing with Calus.
Shadow Legion cowards. This is Empress Kaito, the true sovereign of the Cabal. You've chosen to ally yourself with a gutless traitor worshipping a false god.
Yo.
She's one of the characters you fight alongside and feel relieved, even when everything else in the world feels so fragile. Speaking of Calus, let's talk a bit about his character. Calus is someone who we've never actually faced. He was always detached in some way, either a robot on a Leviathan or as a memory in Duality. Lightfall is actually the first time we've seen him in a proper form. And what a form it is. A boastful, desperate creature, already with a hunger for power, given the Witness's gift. Covered in gems, he relishes his own beauty. He never earned that power. He's described as someone who lived only for gluttony, rather than conquest or victory, and he surrendered his exile to the Witness to gain that infinite power. I absolutely love him. He may be an all-powerful being on the surface, but he's that same beast underneath, and that's what makes him such a scary character. Every single scene between him and the Witness makes you feel that hunger.
You have all you wanted. Emperor. I am glorious.
He cannot escape it, and he wants Keitel dead for her defection to humanity. And while Calus and Keitel's relationship is definitely one of the highlights of the story, in my opinion it ends in a fashion unbefitting of their fight. After the final boss, you and Keitel stand over his body, and she breathes a sigh of relief and says,
No more running away. Rest now.
This was a wonderful send-off. Until Nimbus flies in and delivers probably the worst line in all of Lightfall.
The uglier they are, the harder they fall, right?
That wasn't funny.
Come on, dude. It's the end of the damn world. You come up with a quip like that? Yes, they want comic relief. Yes, sometimes Nimbus's inappropriate attitude is charming. No, now is not the time. Even Marvel understood this. The amount of jokes and quips reduced as we went from the first Avengers until Infinity War. They got that this was a story building up over a decade, and that people would be disappointed if the world they were invested in had a stupid, jovial attitude. Anyways, speaking of the final mission, it's a wonderful mission that is considered the highlight of the expansion by many. You have to slowly fight towards the Veil, destroying cannons and blasting through walls to only get to the door of the containment. This fight builds up the tension very well, and leads to the best gameplay sequence arguably in all of Destiny. Pinned down by hundreds of enemies, you, Keitel, and the friendly Cabal are left to defend against insurmountable forces, allowing you to exercise the full suite of Strand. Keitel stays behind to defend the door from further forces, and you jump down the facility, and it is intense. You snake through tiny gaps in the wiring and the walls to get to the Veil, being able to hear Calus running in the distance. When you finally get to the fight, it is stunning. Calus is 3 times your size. He's covered in gaudy armor, glittering like a prize, boasting all his power. He shouts at you,
No? Oh, there's a culmination.
It is stressful. Surrounded by constantly spawning troops, empowered by Strand, chased down by tormentors, the Veil surrounds you, pulsating with life, blasts of pervading darkness. This is it, and it is the perfect fight to end Calus' story. Now let's get into some of my smaller, more disjointed complaints. I don't really want to get into the nitty-gritty of what the Veil is or how it wasn't explained in the story, because honestly, it's all been talked about. Instead, I want to bring up a different question. Why add the Veil now? Why add a new, all-powerful MacGuffin this close to the end of the Light and Dark saga? Every other story-important item, like the Traveler, the War Mines, and the Pyramids, have had years to be established, and it's paid off by still being pivotal to the story. You have to wonder then, what storytelling potential does the Veil have? How long do we have for it to become an interesting part of the story? I joke about the others being MacGuffins, but they are well developed. How long do we have to develop the Veil for it to become an interesting part of the story? Including the current one, there are 3 seasons left in the year, and each of them are to contain smaller scale continuations of the story. If you've played the Veil storyline in Season of the Deep, you'd know that it seems like these continuations tell you next to nothing. Are they going to drip feed us a relevant answer with 2 more missions before the final shape? Honestly, there just isn't enough time unless they pivot those seasonal story updates to be much bigger, make it pivotal in TFS, or to simply leave it on Neomuna. I want to say I'm hopeful, but it's not as if they can change things in time if the next seasons follow the same path. AAA development is slow, and they're most definitely done with pretty much every season of Lightfall before it launches. As an optimistic person, I hate to say this, but I'm not hopeful. And honestly, my biggest disappointment is how lacking the themes are compared to previous expansions. Shadowkeep's theme and motif was of trauma and overcoming it, with Eris having a literal embodiment of her trauma following her around. Beyond Light had a theme of Pandora's box and the ramifications of transhumanism, us harnessing the darkness, Clovis Bray opening the Vex portal and placing people into exobodies. Witch Queen had a very powerful theme of religious doubt, with Zavala finding himself losing hope in the Traveler, doubting if the deity is actually a force of good or of ambivalent self-protection. The seasonal stories during the expansions even kept those themes going. Beyond Light's Season of Arrival showed the box being opened by the Traveler's healing, leading to the Pyramids coming to wreak havoc. Witch Queen's Season of Haunted absolutely took the idea of religious doubt and ran with it, with physical manifestations of the character's grief coming to haunt them, especially Zavala, who gave up his son because of his devotion to the light, leading him to doubt even more why he believes in the Traveler.
Stay with me a little longer. Life moved on around us, but we can wait here for a moment.
You chose to move when you could have stayed.
Safi,
Don't. You have made your choice. You said you mourned our deaths, Zavala, stood at our graves, cried out in prayer to your Traveler.
for a long time.
What good did it do? No ghosts found us. Instead, the Traveler gave the light to your enemies. Forgiveness? You shared meals with fallen behind your walls after what they took.
Your true family wouldn't torment you. This is your grief, Zavala.
My husband is not a liar, and I am speaking his words. He knows what he is.
A hollow man leading others to die. For a silent god.
Witch Queen's final season, Season of the Seraph, took this even further with Clovis Bray and Aramis both trying to destroy the Traveler and take its place. All of these storylines have a central theme that's carried through meaningfully. But what is Lightfall's theme? Seriously, what is Lightfall's theme? Brotherhood? Show me the 3 times Nimboni and Rohan's Kuomo fist bumped and tell me that it's actually relevant to a central theme. They could have explored the ethical ramifications of putting an entire civilization into a computer, but they didn't, and no, I don't count the lore books, I don't want to read. Jokes aside, the lore books are meant to be supplements to the story, not a replacement for them. I absolutely love the book Final Days, which describes the last days of the Neomuni as they scramble to keep children calm, families lament over hopes they never fulfilled, and city officials wondering if this lockdown is actually a good idea or not. The lore books are fantastic, but should not be the most fleshed out part of the story. It seems like this theme of Brotherhood is what Lightfall wants to be its central theme, with the expansion seasons following suit, but said seasonal stories outdo it. Season of Defiance and Season of the Deep actually explore the ideas of connection through war and keeping your kin safe at all costs, with Amanda Holiday sacrificing herself and Commander Sloane's connection with Asa. These seasonal stories, while not perfect, are at least able to take advantage of the expansion's supposed themes. You know, all of these glaring faults being present, leaves me with a feeling that the story wasn't actually thought through very well. How could a game with such a good track record with writing fumble this hard? Well, that leads me to my final question. Was Lightfall rushed? While I can't guarantee it, it really does feel like it is. The writing, the themes, the characters, dialogue, and even the weapons just feel incomplete. And that's not even mentioning the high instability of the servers. And truly, why did it turn out this way? Was it the result of needing an extra expansion between Witch Queen and the final shape? Why does it feel so pointless in the bigger story? To tell the truth, I'm not really sure. But honestly, I think that the biggest culprit is the yearly release schedule for the expansions. Sure, Forsaken, Shadowkeep, and Beyond Light were able to keep up just fine, but then they delayed the launch of the Witch Queen, which in turn gave us some of, if not the strongest gameplay, story, and production quality we've ever seen out of Bungie. There were moments in that campaign I was so impressed with that I still think about them to this day. Like when Zavala broke his calm demeanor, I had trouble breathing because of how genuinely afraid I was of him. Or when Ikora and Zavala were arguing, leading to her second-guessing her own judgment. These moments are incredibly powerful, and sadly they just don't have an equivalent in Lightfall. One of my favorite moments in Destiny's story actually comes from Season of Haunted, where Zavala begs his deceased wife to forgive him. He goes to her grave every year on the anniversary of her death, despising himself and wishing for forgiveness. And he's done this for hundreds of years. This moment was substantial for the characters and had much better writing than Lightfall in its entirety. When a seasonal story can outdo a big expansion's writing, what's the point in giving it the time? In the end, I still do love Destiny and Lightfall, not only for how fun it is, but also the feelings it invoked in me, good and bad. I talked this long because I am passionate about Destiny. Even if it's not perfect, even if there are issues, I will still continue to say that Destiny is my favorite game of all time. The game I will continue to put hundreds of more hours into. And honestly, I think that's good enough for me. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. It's been a long time in the making, and all I hope is that you enjoyed it. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Charlie, Aoife, and Casey for giving me the support and the criticism I needed to make this video the best it could have been. And until next time, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.